We continue now at the top of Daf Chavav Amud Aleph and Meseches Megillah. This is Megillah Daf 26a. The Mishnah continues Yichu Svarim. Let's say you sell the cloths that are used to wrap up Sifrei Torah, so you can use the money to buy Svarim. Now Rashi over here comments, we're talking specifically Svarim of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Use that money to buy Svarim, which are scrolls of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. And Svarim, let's say you sell Svarim, again scrolls of Nevi'im and Ksuvim, so then Lochin Torah, so then you can use that money to buy a Sefer Torah. Avolim Machru Torah, but let's say they sell a Sefer Torah. So lo yichu svarim, you can't use the money for svarim for nevi'im and ksuvim. And svarim lo yichu mitpachos. If you sell nevi'im and ksuvim, you can't use the money for the cloths that are used to wrap around the Sefer Torah. And mitpachos lo yichu teva, if you sell the cloths, you can't use that money to buy an aron. And teva lo yichu beis hakneses, if you sell the aron, you can't use that money to buy a shul. And beis hakneses lo yichu es harachov. If you sell a beis hakneses, you can't use that money to buy the town square. And the Mishnah concludes that the same rules apply by any leftover, any surplus money. Let's say you used some of the money to buy something appropriate, but you have some leftover money. The same rules apply to the leftover money. And Rashi over here explains, Avol machru Torah, shemalin bekodesh v'lo moridin. The idea over here of the Mishnah is, that when you sell a certain item, so you have to go up in Kedusha. You have to use the money for something holier. So therefore, for example, you sell Nevi'im and Ksuvim, you can use the money to buy a Sefer Torah. But if you sell a Sefer Torah, you can't go down in Kedusha. You can't use it to buy, let's say, the Nevi'im. And Rashi continues over here, Tosefta Malin Bekodesh. How do you know this idea of Malin Bekodesh? Betzalel made the Mishkan, and Moshe put it up. He was greater. V'lo reading, we don't go down in Kedusha. Dechsiv es machtos achatoim ha'ela benafshosam v'yososam rikue pachem tzipoy lamizbeach ki hikrivim lefnei Hashem v'yikdashu kevon shehukdashu hukdashu adkan. Same basic idea over here. Once something becomes holy, so it has this level of holiness, it's not supposed to go down in holiness. V'chein b'mosrei, and the same is true by the surplus money. For example, machru svarim, let's say you sold svarim, v'lochu mimixas hadamim Torah, you use some of the money from this sale of the Nevi'im and Ksuvim to buy Sefer Torah. Lo yichu min hamoser davar shekadusha aso pechusa. You can't use that surplus money to buy something that again has less kedusha. That money also needs to be used for something that is more holy. And the Gemara says, B'nei Yo'ir shemachru rechova shalir. The Mishnah had a case again. The people of the city, they sell the town square. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar Barchana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Zu divrei Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi stumta. These are the words, meaning this opinion of the Mishnah. This is the opinion of Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi stumta. And what it means by stumta is, in other words, it's a stam Mishnah. It's not attributed to anybody. It's anonymous in the Mishnah, but it's the opinion of Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi. But the Chachamim say, Harachov ein bo mishum kedusha. When it comes to the town square, it has no kedusha. The town square is a public area. It's not an area with any kedusha. It has none of these rules. For Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi, my time. Now, according to Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi, what is the reason? Why does he say that the town square has a kedusha? The answer is Hoel v'ha'am mispalulin bo betanios uv'ma'amados. Since the people, they actually do daven there sometimes when they have the public fast days for rain, and also the ma'amados. The ma'amados were the gatherings. These were the representatives, the non-kohanim, who were representatives for the public over the public karbanos. All karbanos have to have bailim, and so they used to have shifts. They had shifts of kohanim that worked in the Beis HaMikdash, and they also had shifts of people who would, so to speak, stand over, be the bailim of the karban, and that was the ma'amados. They also would gather in the town square and daven. Now the Rabbanan will respond to Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi, Hahu akroi bi'alma. That's not the purpose of the town square. Every once in a while, it's used for tanios and ma'amados, but that's not enough to give a kedusha. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Zu divrei Rabbi Menachem behedra aminim b'tosefta de Megillah dehu amra. It's explicit in the Tosefta Megillah that in fact this is Rabbi Menachem bar Yossi Stumta's opinion. Hoel va mispalin bo b'tanios uva ma'amados. Again, people would daven in the town square on the fast days and at the Maimid. It says explicitly in Meseches Tainis, again, if the time passed and it didn't rain, they weren't answered, they would bring out the aron to the town square, and that's what they would daven. Tosefes uv'ma'amados tanan miskansin b'orein v'kor ma'aseh bereshis. Now, by the ma'amados, it says they would gather, they would read ma'aseh bereshis. B'tanya v'gemara anshe maimin nechnosin l'beis hakneses v'yoshvin arba tanios b'shabbos. It says the people of the Maimid, they would enter the shul and they would fast. After Beis HaKnesses hayolem kavua berchova shalir. Is it possible that they have a Beis HaKnesses that was set in the town square? Umiskansin shama maimed kulo kederach sheshaninu bebikur. Man, everyone's gathering in a shul. That can't be. Kol hayoros sheva maimed miskansin layoros shel maimed v'lonim berchova shalir. It talks about the fact that they gathered in the town square. V'lo yonechnasin lebatim v'lonim sham. They didn't go into the houses. In any case, the point is, you see that there was a gathering that they did in the town square. And as the Gemara over here says, it only happened once in a while. What does that mean? It wouldn't happen again until at least halfway through the year. It would be another 6 months till they would gather. But Rashi says it's not so clear over Talmidei Rabbeinu Yitzchak Halevi Matzasi. Rashi says, I found in the students of Rabbeinu Yitzchak Halevi uv'ma'amados lo garsin, and take out ma'amados. It's really only the Tanios where they were gathering, but you should take ma'amados out of our Gemara. According to that explanation, they didn't actually daven in the town square, Adkan, until here is the quote. So there's a little bit of a question within Rashi whether b'ma'amados should be in this Gemara or not. The Gemara continues at the two dots, Beis HaKnesses lochin teva, if they sell a shul, they can use the money to buy an aron. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmeni, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmeni says in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, Lo shanu ela Beis HaKnesses shel kfarim. This entire halacha is only true by a shul that is in the villages. Aval Beis HaKnesses shel krachen, but if you have a shul that's in the larger cities, Kaven demei alma asule, since people use that shul, they come from everywhere, from all over the place. So lo matzu mizavni le, so you can't even sell such a shul. To havale deram, that really belongs to the public. No one really has control of that shul, that they have the ability to sell it. As Rashi over here says, Lo shana diacholim limchor Beis HaKnesses ela shel kfarin. You can only sell a shul that's in a village. Aval shel krachen havel bate knasios deram, that becomes a completely public shul. Va'kol bale, and everyone's the owner. It's not just the people of the city that own it. It's not like the people of the city can even decide to sell it. They don't have such a power. That's what Rav Shmuel bar Nachmeni is saying in the name of Rabbi Yonasan. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rav Ashi says, "Hai be kinishta de Masa Mechasya." This shul that's in the city of Masa Mechasya, Afa gav de me'alma asula. Even though people do come from all over the place, they come from outside to go and daven in the shul. Kevon da daita didika asu. Since they're coming by my knowledge, if I want to, I'm able to sell this shul. The simple explanation over here is that Rav Ashi really had full control. Everything that was done in this shul was done through him, and therefore Rav Ashi felt that he had the bailus over this shul in Masa Mechasya, that he would be able to sell it. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have the following question. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Ma'isa bebeis HaKnesses shel Torsiim. There was an incident in the shul of the Torsiim. Rashi says the Torsiim were people who worked with copper. So they had this shul, Shahayab Yerushalayim. It was in the city of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim obviously is a large city. It's like any of the other krachen. Shemacharu al Rabbi Eliezer, and they took the shul and they sold it to Rabbi Eliezer. V'yasab b'kol tzarachav, and he did what he needed with it. He used it for his own purposes. So over here you see very clearly. V'hasam, but over there, the krachim have it. Clearly it is a shul in a city, and yet they're selling it. So it seems to go against what we just said before. We just said before, again, Rav Shmuel bar Nachmeni, in the name of Rabbi Yonasan, and Beis HaKnesses shel krachen, you're not allowed to sell it because the public uses it. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara answers, Hahibe knishta zuta have. That case is an exception. It was a small shul. Ve'inu avdua, and these Torsiim, they're the ones that made the shul. It was a private shul. Even though it was in a large city, it wasn't really like a public city shul that everybody was using. It was a small shul. That's why they were able to sell it. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have another question. Beveis eretz achuzaschem. It talks about the fact that you have the halacha of tsaras. Some tsaras happens in a house that's in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of your inheritance. So the Brisa says, achuzaschem metame ben goyim. If it qualifies as achuzaschem, if it's your heritage, if this is a property that belongs, so to speak, to one particular shevet, private individuals, then you can have tsaras. Then there can be halachas of negoyim. Ve'ein Yerushalayim metame ben negoyim. But it doesn't apply to Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim does not have the din of tumas negoyim. And Rashi over here says, Ve'ein Yerushalayim metame ben negoyim, de lav achuzahi. It's not called an achuza. We're going to explain this later on. The Svira Leila Haitana, because this Tana holds, Lo Nischalka Yerushalayim L'Shvatim. Yerushalayim wasn't given to any particular shevet. V'lo Nafla Begorla, was never distributed. It's not really an inheritance. Lo Yehuda v'lo Binyamin. It wasn't given to Yehuda, it wasn't given to Binyamin. It's completely public property, and therefore there's no halach of Negoim. It's not considered Achuzaschem. It has to specifically be Beis Eretz Achuzaschem. The halachas don't apply to Yerushalayim. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Ani lo shamati el makom mikdash bilvad. He said, I don't think that's true by all of Yerushalayim. This halacha that you're saying that it's not achuzaschem, that's only true of the area of the Beis HaMikdash. And Rashi over here explains, Ani lo shamati shaloye mitame el makom mikdash bilvad. The area that's not tummy is the area of the Beis HaMikdash. Mishum debayis shel kodeshu, because that's a holy area. Vegabe negoyim uva asher lo habayis bo'inan. It has to be by negoyim. It has to be the one who owns the house. That's, in other words, again, it's a private house. This is Bayis Shel Kodesh. This belongs to Kodesh. It's an area that's really designated for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avol Yerushalayim Matame ben Goyim. But Rabbi Yehuda is saying that when it comes to Yerushalayim, it is Matame ben Goyim. The sovereign is Chalkal Shvatim, because Yerushalayim also was given to the Shvatim. V'achuzaschem korinale, it's called achuzaschem. Katani miyas. So the point over here is, what does it say here? Rabbi Yehuda de Islay Nischalka. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that Yerushalayim is given to the Shvatim, Lo shanu ela makam mikdash. It's only true by the area of the Beis Hamikdash that it's not metame. Avol bate knasio su bate midrashas. But when it comes to the other shuls and the bate medrash sheba in the area of Yerushalayim, keshar bate yoir, that's just like any other house in the city. The afagav shel krachu, even though it's in a big city, we don't say it's public. Apparently, we say that the shuls and the bate medrash, they count and they're considered to be something private. That's the question that the Gemara is asking over here. The Gemara says, "Ha bate knasio su bate midrashas." What Rabbi Yehuda is saying is, even though Rabbi Yehuda says that it's nischalka l'shvatim and the area of Yerushalayim is no different than any other place, but only the Beis Hamikdash is an exception. The shuls and the bate medrash in Yerushalayim mitamin. They would be metame. So the question is very simple. Amai, why are they metame? Had the krachenhav, it should be the same halacha. If they belong to the big cities and they're considered completely public areas, people are coming in from all over from outside, it should be the same halacha, just like we're saying over here that if it's completely public, it's a problem to sell the particular shul. We should also say it's not metame bin agoyim because it's considered totally public. And so the Gemara says, you're right, Ema, instead you should say differently. Instead you should change the text of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda says, Ani lo shamati elamakom mekudash bilvad. I heard this halacha only by the holy areas, not just the Beis Hamikdash, not the Makom Mikdash, but any area that's holy. The shuls, the Batei Medrash, all of those areas are considered to be public places. If they're public places, then they're not considered, again, like private property, like Achuzaschem. They're not going to be Matam Minagayim, and it will be consistent with what we said above, that you're not allowed to sell these areas as well. And the Gemara now explains what's going on, what is the machlokas in this brisa. But what exactly is the machlokas over here? And the Gemara says, as we already said in Rashi, Tanakama savar lo nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. The Tanakama holds that Yerushalayim was not divided up into any particular shevet. It belongs to everybody. It's totally public. But Rabbi Yehuda savar, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. Yerushalayim was given over to the Shvatim. It was given over, as we're going to see in a moment. It was given over to the shevet of Yehuda and the shevet of Binyamin, and it was divided up into actual private properties. And that's the machlokas over here in the brisa. We find the exact same machlokas between the following Tanoim in the Brisa as follows. The Tanyas we learned in the Brisa. Mahoya bechelko shel Yehuda. What part of Yerushalayim belonged to Yehuda? What was in the chelak of Yehuda? Har Habayis, that's the Temple Mount, Halishkos v'Azaros, and also the chambers of the Beis Hamikdash and the courtyards of the Beis Hamikdash. That belonged to Yehuda. Mahoya bechelko shel Binyamin. And what belonged to the portion of Binyamin? Ulam v'Heichol u'Beis Kodshei HaKadoshim. So really the area of what you would say the Beis Hamikdash itself. The Ulam, that's the entrance hall to the Beis HaMikdash, and the Heichol, that's the Beis HaMikdash itself, the Kodesh, and the Kodshei Kodashim also, that all belonged to Binyamin. Uritzua haisa yotzes mechelko shel Yehuda, and there was a small strip of land that went from the portion of Yehuda. V'nechneses bechelko shel Binyamin, it entered into the territory of Binyamin. Uba mizbeach banoi, and that's where the mizbeach was. So Yehuda really had the mizbeach. And the Brisa continues, Vaya Binyamin atzadik mitztaro le b'chol yom, and Binyamin atzadik, he was distressed by this every single day. He was distressed that he didn't have the mizbeach lebola. He wanted to absorb that as well. Shenemar, that's exactly what the pasuk means when it says chofei olav kol hayom, that he hovers over it, so to speak, all the time. In other words, Binyamin wanted that, the mizbeach, to be in his territory as well. And lafigach, therefore, for that reason, zacha Binyamin merited v'nasa ushpizchon l'shchina, and he became like the host of the shchina. That's why the Kodesh Kodashim is in his territory. And so this above brisa clearly says that Yerushalayim was divided up among Yehuda and Binyamin. It was divided to the Shvatim. And the Gemara continues, V'haitan asavar lo nischalka Yerushalayim l'shvatim. And the following Tana seems to hold the opposite, holds that Yerushalayim was not divided among the Shvatim. That's why we're saying it's a machlokas Tanoim. The Tanyas we learned in a Brisa, Ein maskirim bottom Yerushalayim. You're not allowed to rent out houses in Yerushalayim, because the houses don't really belong to them. As Rashi over here says, Ein maskirin balei bottom es bateim. The owners of houses shouldn't rent them out. La'ole regalim, to those who are traveling for the regal to visit Yerushalayim. Ela bechinam nosim lehem. You have to give it to them for free. V'nechnasim l'sochen. You have to give out these houses for free to people who are traveling for the regal. It's exactly this idea. It wasn't really divided to the Shvatim. There's no real ownership of Yerushalayim. It's considered to be a public area. The Brisa continues, Rebbe Elazar bar Tzadok, some have Rebbe Elazar bar Shimon Omer. Rebbe Elazar bar Shimon says, Af lo mitos, not only is it true you're not allowed to rent out the houses, you can't even rent out the beds. Lafikach, and then the Brisa says, therefore, oros kodshim bali ushpizin, notan osan bezroa, the hides of the karbonos that people would bring, they would bring up their animals to Yerushalayim, so the hides of those karbonos would be given to the hosts, but they would take them by force. In other words, really, you're not supposed to be paying. They're really supposed to be able to stay for free, but they would take it by force. It's really inappropriate. They shouldn't take it in this manner. Amar Abaye, and Abaye says, based on this brayso, Shmami, no, you see from this, Orachara, that it's proper derech eretz in general, lemishbak inish gulfo mashchabu shpize, that a person should leave over. Let's say he's got a flask vessel that he used for wine, and let's say he shechted a behemoth, he has a hide. That's a normal thing to leave over by a host. But again, in Yerushalayim, where it's really all public, you shouldn't really have to pay for renting out. So really over there, they would take it by force, but you wouldn't really have to pay at all to stay in Yerushalayim. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Lo shanu ela shelo machru shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mayim b'anshay ha'ir. This entire halacha that we have in our Mishnah is only true when it wasn't sold by the shiva tuvei ha'ir. The shiva tuvei ha'ir were the individuals who basically ran the city. So if they didn't sell it in front of the people of the city, that's when this halacha is true. And Rashi will explain. But let's say it was sold by the 7 tuvei ha'ir in front of all the people of the city. Afilu, then even, we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Rashi says, Lo shanu de'in moridin damim miktushasan ubeis hakneses b'chashivusa omed. We're talking specifically about when you sell a beis hakneses. So we said when you sell a beis hakneses, so the money retains the holiness of the beis hakneses, and the beis hakneses itself, whoever you sold it to, that also retains its kedusha. Af biad lokeach, even the hands of the person who bought the beis hakneses, it still has its kedusha. Dumya de svarim, that's similar to svarim, lokeach ben sefer Torah. If you sell, let's say, svarim of neviim and ksuvim, and you use that money to buy a sefer Torah, the money has that kedusha, and the svarim also are still svarim. V'halo manik svarim b'haviyasan, whoever bought the svarim has to keep the svarim in the same state. So that's only true. Ela shelo machra hatuvim b'reshus ha'am. That's only if it wasn't sold by the leaders of the city with the permission of those who were in the city. Avolim machru v'chulu. But let's say it was sold again by the shiva tuvei ha'ir b'mayim b'anshay ha'ir. So then paka kedusha min ha'chefetz. So then the kedusha leaves the object. The Beis HaKnesses loses that kedusha. Umin hadamim, and there's no kedusha on the money as well. Umuter lasos man kol ritzonim. You can do whatever you want with the money. In that particular situation, there's no kedusha, there's no restrictions. V'hainu deboy minei Ravina me Ravashi altila devei knishta. And that's what's going to be coming up, that Ravina is going to be asking Ravashi about this mound that he has, this mound of earth that he has from the Beis HaKnesses. Ma'ula Mizra, are you allowed to plant in it? Alma b'machar kol duhu habayis v'amos b'kedusha sayu kaimi. So it seems like in that case, that when you make some kind of a sale, so everything really does stay with the kedusha, and that's what the Gemara will discuss in a moment. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chavav Amud Beis.